All right, guys, welcome back to the garage. Tons to do on this CRV. Let's get to it. Now in the front, full complete struts, tie rod ends, sway rod links, and front control arms. That should take care of the front. And then in the back, we're just gonna do full strut assemblies also. I got the back jacked up, so let's start there. Now first thing for the rear, you're gonna wanna pop these covers off in the back hatch. And inside are the upper strut bolts. So we'll just take those off before we go underneath. Now those bolts are down in there, so having a magnet might help get them out of the cavity in there. And they are 14s. Now struts on this thing is pretty easy, but if you're going to tackle this job, I would check this rear lower shock bolt. That's the one bolt that's going to give you problems, especially if you live in the rust belt. Now this one is pretty rusty, but that bolt actually doesn't look too bad. So what can happen is that bolt will freeze inside the sleeve in the lower shock, and then you have to cut it out, and that's no fun. So that doesn't look too bad. Should come right out.
You serious?
Remember all that talk about check those rear bolts? Mine look like they're gonna come out. No. And plus I'm afraid if, even if I did get to spin, it's probably seized in there and still won't come out. So time to start cutting. I think I want to do this bolt here as long as it comes out, and then undo the brake line, and that should give me a shot with the Sawzall to cut on either side of the shock and hopefully pop it out of there. I think I'm going to go ahead and remove this caliper just to make sure I get this brake line all the way out of the way and get in there and cut. I can't wait to do these brakes. Okay, I might have some access in here to get a Sawzall in there. I got some long blades. If I have to come from the bottom, I will. At least get the shock out, and then I'll have to cut the nut off also. Nope, gotta go from the bottom. Okay, I got all the way through this side, which it sucks because you have to cut through the sleeve and the bushing also, so it takes a while, but I got it separated there. I want to see what happens if I try to spin the bolt out now. Okay, you should be able to see that whole sleeve is moving in there. That's why that bolt won't come out. Yeah, so I'm gonna have to cut the other side. All right, got both sides cut now. Let's see if we can pry the shock out of there. Okay, something I had to do is take these 2 bolts out of this shield here, just allow the strut to fit down in this cavity a little bit better. And then that gave me room to pry it out of the cup and get it out. All right, and now I just got to cut that nut off of there so I can put a bolt and new nut and get the shock back in. Okay, I got that cut off. Still a little piece of bolt in there, so I'm going to use my grinding wheel. Very carefully just grind on this side of it till that rest of that bolt frees up. All right, just a little bit of grinding and there's that rest of that bolt. Now, you put the strut back in, put a nut and bolt in, and it should be good to go. And you can see here, that bolt and that sleeve have become one, and that's why it wouldn't come out. And it happens a lot on Hondas. Moisture and stuff gets in there, seizes that bolt, rust, and then you're stuck cutting it out. Okay, the other one came out with the end of the spring towards the back, so that's how we're gonna put this one in. I'm not sure if it matters, but here we go. All right, these were not lining up. When these were lined up, this was not lined up in the pocket there. So I'm gonna caulk this top hat to match the one that came out. So hopefully it goes in there nice and smooth. All right, so to get these similar, all right, should be good to go in. Went ahead and put the top hat nuts on just to hold it in place. And I dug through my stash of bolts and I got a Subaru front strut bolt. It's a little short, but should work for now until I can find some longer bolts or just buy an OEM bolt. Since I had to jack this up to get this arm to line up with the knuckle and get the bolt in, went ahead and tightened it now that the suspension's under load, and I'll do that shock bolt also. Okay, strut is finally in. What a fun project that's been. And I get to do the other side. But before I go over there, let me do these brakes real quick. Bam! Got the brakes done. Went ahead and rebuilt the rest of the suspension. powder coated everything, you know, making it brand new. Now I gotta go do the other side, and once I'm done with that, we'll go do the front. All right, so it's been about a week since we did the rear, and I have a few things to get you guys up on. First of all, I got my rear bolts for the rear struts, the lower bolt, since I cut those out. Right now, I just got some temporary ones in there because they were too short, but these are the proper ones. We'll have to swap those out eventually. Also, while I had that up, I decided I was going to bleed those rear brakes. So I came up here to the master cylinder, and it was dry. Now, when this thing came to me, it had like no brakes. The pedal goes to the floor, and it would barely stop. So I knew there was going to be an issue. I just wasn't sure what it was going to be. Turns out, as I filled the master cylinder, I had a leak down there, and you can see I had to make a new line because right there at the junction, it was rusted and leaking all the fluid out. So you can't get this line brand new anymore. So I just went to a parts store and got a pre-made line that had the fittings on both ends and bent it up and got it in there. And I was able to bleed the master cylinder and get the rear brakes bled. So it's holding fluid. I think we should be good to continue. Now you can see I've already started tearing apart the front end. I wanted to get the knuckles off so I could do the wheel bearings since I have access to a press outside of the garage. So I'm currently in process doing that. I still have the control arms to replace, struts to replace, tie rod ends. We'll do the sway bar end links, the brakes. So taking this knuckle off helps anyway. It's just not gonna be in the way to replace everything. Whereas if I left it on there, then I'd be fighting around it to get the control arms off, the strut and everything. So if you're doing this job and you're maybe just doing one of these things, you could definitely leave the knuckle on, just replace the strut or just replace the control arm. But if you're coming in here to do a full rebuild, I mean, take the knuckle off. Gives you so much more room to get in everything. Now to get the knuckles off, you just have your bolts for the strut. Mine were 19 with a 22 millimeter nut. Then you have your lower ball joint with a 17. Take your caliper and bracket off, axle nut, and then it's ready to come off. Obviously, the axle nut will probably give you a hard time because it's on there pretty tight usually. Lower ball joint, you have to separate that from the control arm, those bolts, and then you're good to go. All right, so I think the first thing I'm going to tackle is the struts. It'd be the easiest thing to swap out. You just have your 14 nuts up here. Then you have your tie rod end, and then the strut can come out. Obviously, if you had the knuckle in here, you'd have to remove these two bolts in your brake line, and then it should come right out. Now before you do the last nut, make sure you're holding the strut because it's going to fall. All right, here we got the old strut and the new strut. Now you can see, this is the way this one came out. This is not a perfect triangle. This spread is wider than these two. So you can see this actually has to be clocked to match. That way it goes back up in the strut tower easily. So I'm just going to turn this and then stick it back up there. All right, next up, we're gonna do this lower control arm. You got a 19 there, 19 back there, and then sway bar link on this one is 15 millimeter nuts. I'm gonna attempt to loosen it from the sway bar and just leave it connected to the control arm because I got new end links to go on also. So no need to remove it there. Hopefully we just remove it here and pull the whole control arm out with the end link. All right, the ball joint's spinning, so I want the clamp on there to keep it from spinning. Yeah, typical sway bar link. The whole ball joint was spinning in there, so I tore the boot off, which tore right off, and clamped some vice grips on there, and that did it. Okay, I got my old control arm and my new one. Got an end link. I'm gonna loosely install this. We'll tighten it up once it's in the car. All right, control arm is in. I tightened that bolt. I left that one a little loose. We'll tighten that once everything's back together and we can load the suspension. End link's tightened up. Now we get to do the tie rods. But before we do the tie rod ends, let's go and get these knuckles on. I put new wheel bearings, new hubs, new ball joints, painted them up. So they're good to go. But one thing I wanted to note about the ball joints. This is the one that came out. It's smooth. Here's the one that I ordered for an 02 to 06 CRV. And while they looked similar, the smooth one is actually taller. If you press this one in, you won't have a groove for the clip to secure it in the hub. So I don't know what the difference is, why there's some that are smooth like this and a tad longer than these. But the only thing I can think of is these are non-ABS hubs. There's no ABS sensor in here. So that's the only thing I can think of that would be different between hubs and why one would take a certain ball joint and the other one would take the other. So maybe the smooth style, slightly longer, are for non-ABS cars, and the splined, slightly shorter, are for the ABS cars. Just something to keep in mind. I went through, ordered 2 different sets of ball joints. Both of them were this style until I had to go to the parts store and verify I got the right ones. So let's get these in. All right, struts are done, sway bar links are done, control arms are done, brakes are done. Now let's do these tie rods. All right, tie rods. Now if you're just doing the outers, you can just remove it from the inner tie rod. But if they're the stock ones and you live in the Rust Belt, good luck. We're gonna do the inners and outers. So I got my inners here. And this generation Hondas, they have a weird design where the tie rod ends actually connect in the center of the steering rack, and the steering rack's up here on the firewall. They only did it for this generation Honda and Acuras, and then they switched back to the normal style steering racks. But the only tool you'll need is a 29mm crow's foot. Now, there are 2 different versions of this that I have found. There's a slightly thicker version, a chrome, just like looks like the end of a wrench. And then I found this thinner one. And what you gotta watch out for is some of these aftermarket inner tie rods, the hex here is actually shorter than the OEM. Now these aftermarket ones seem to match up with the ones that are on this, so it makes me think that maybe these are aftermarket. But basically what you have to do is if you get the thicker version of these, you may have to grind it down to fit. It's just what I've seen online. So that's why I went with the thinner one, just so I wouldn't have to do that. So let's get started. Now the first thing you have to do is bend this washer up, and that's actually the lock washer. When you install these, you install this washer and it bends over this to keep this from spinning out. So you want to flatten this so that this will be free to spin. Now I got the steering wheel turned all the way to the left to try to get the better access to these. It moves the steering rack over this way. And I'm going to use a long pry bar and a hammer and see if I can get that flattened out. Okay, got my crow's foot on my 1/2-inch ratchet and probably use jack handle or something for leverage. And hopefully that thing spins off of there. All right, we got our old tie rod and our new one. And basically we're just to match these up so that they're close, just to get to alignment, which that's pretty much spot on. So we'll spin that on there. That looks pretty close right there. Now we're just going to snug this up. There's no reason to crank on this because we're going straight to an alignment shot once it's out of the garage. That's good right there. And we throw it back in the car. Don't forget your lock washer. It's going to slide over the end right there and it locks onto the shaft, and then we'll bend one of these edges over to keep it from spinning out. All right, tie rod is in. Make sure you smash that washer over so that this can't spin off. Got it connected to the strut. Now I get to do the other side. All right, got both of those knocked out. You need that 29mm crow's foot if you're doing inner tie rods on this generation Honda, like the CRVs, Elements, Civics, I think the RSX also from Acura, same way. And one of the last things we're gonna do is dish these ugly factory steelies and bald tires for some used wheels and tires off Marketplace. They're not perfect, tires aren't new, but way better than what was on there. All right, well, that's it for the CRV project. That thing sat for like 2 years due to not running, and it ended up being an alternator issue. So when it got towed to me, that was the first thing I did. Then we did the transmission mount, all the suspension. So now I just got to do a quick detail, alignment, and down the road it goes. So hopefully that thing has a bunch more miles left in it. Appreciate you guys watching. See you on the next one.